When Michael Jordan was at the very top of the world, 6 championship rings, the most famous athlete alive, a name that people said in the same breath as the word greatest, something happened that nobody saw coming. Not on a basketball court, not in front of cameras, not with a crowd cheering his name. It happened at 3:17 in the morning on a cold, dark street on the south side of Chicago. No lights, no crew, no security, just a dying street lamp flickering over a beat-up brown Honda Civic with fogged-up windows and a small circle wiped in the fog on the driver's side. Just big enough for the person inside to see out. And inside that car, trying to sleep in a coat too thin for October, was a man named Darnell Tuck. Darnell was not a stranger. He was not a fan who had waited outside an arena. And he was not someone who had written a letter or sent a message through social media hoping for a response. Darnell Tuck was the boy who had lived 3 houses down on Castle Hayne Road in Wilmington, North Carolina, in the summer of 1974. He was the one who had played basketball with Michael for 3 hours on the very first day they met. He was the one who sat with Michael on a back porch on the most painful night of Michael's young life. The night Michael found out he had been cut from the varsity team and told him exactly what he needed to hear. He was Michael Jordan's first believer, the one person who had told Michael he would be the greatest before a single person on earth had any reason to agree. And now he was sleeping in a car. Had been for 18 months, no apartment, no job that held, no one who knew where he was. The man who had once helped light the fire that became the greatest basketball career in history, forgotten, invisible, alone in a Honda Civic with a hole in his shoe and 2 days without a real meal, and one photograph on the back seat, kept in a cracked plastic frame of 2 boys from Wilmington with big smiles and their arms around each other. Here is the part that nobody knew. Michael Jordan had been searching for Darnell Tuck for 3 years. 3 years of dead phone numbers and wrong addresses and a private investigator working the south side of Chicago with nothing but patience and an old photograph. 3 years of not giving up on a man who did not know anyone was looking. And on a cold October night, the search ended. Michael drove himself, alone. No driver, no security. Just a plain black hoodie and the address on his phone, and 40 years of friendship underneath all of it. He parked 20 feet from the car. He sat for a moment. Then he got out, walked to that fogged-up window, and knocked 3 times. Slow, patient. The knock of a man who is not leaving. The window rolled down, and what happened next? What Michael said, what he did in the hours and days and months that followed, and the secret that sat at the very bottom of this whole story that nobody knew about until years later, is one of the most powerful things you will ever hear about friendship, loyalty, and what it really means to never let go of someone who mattered to you. But there is a twist in this story, a secret that explains everything. A discovery that Michael made in a box in his late mother's house, something written on yellow school notebook paper in 1985 that changed the entire meaning of that 3 a.m. knock on the window. You are not going to see it coming. Watch the full video. Because the moment this story arrives at that secret, what Darnell wrote, who he wrote it to, and what Michael felt when he finally read it 36 years later, you will understand why this is not just a story about one man helping another. It is a story about 2 people who spent 50 years quietly saving each other without ever knowing they were doing it. Stay with us. You need to hear all of it. To understand what happened that night in Chicago, you have to go back, way back, all the way back to a small city in North Carolina called Wilmington. Back to a street called Castle Hayne Road, where the yards were patchy and the oak trees grew wide and the summers were so long and sticky that the days felt like they would never end. That is where Darnell Tuck grew up. His mama, Celestine Tuck, worked 2 jobs every single day. She cleaned offices downtown in the early mornings before the sun was fully up, and 3 evenings a week she rang up groceries at a little corner store 2 blocks from their house. She wore the same pair of white shoes to both jobs. She kept them clean. Celestine Tuck did not have much, but she had her standards. Darnell's daddy had left when Darnell was 4 years old. Darnell barely remembered his face. What he remembered was the sound the front door made when it closed the last time. A soft click, not a slam, not a fight, just a quiet closing. Like a book being shut in a library. That sound stayed inside Darnell's chest for the rest of his life. It showed up in the strangest places, in the way he watched other fathers at school events, in the way he worked twice as hard at everything, like he was trying to make up for something that had never been his fault to begin with. So Darnell learned early that the world did not hand you anything. You had to go get it, or you had to find somebody who made you believe that getting it was possible. That somebody moved in 3 houses down in the summer of 1974. Michael Jeffrey Jordan was 12 years old when his family settled onto Castlehane Road. He was tall for his age and thin, with big hands that seemed like they had been made for a bigger body, and a laugh that was just a little too loud for whatever room he was in. From the very first day, he had an energy about him, something in the way he carried himself, like he was always right on the edge of doing something. Like stillness was a foreign language his body had never learned to speak. The two boys met because of a basketball. Darnell had been bouncing an old rubber ball in his driveway. Scuffed, slightly flat on one side, the kind of ball you practiced with because you had no other choice. It got away from him on a bad bounce, rolled down the cracked sidewalk, and stopped right at the feet of this new tall kid walking past. The boy picked it up, turned it over in those big hands, looked at it, then looked up at Darnell with calm, clear eyes. "You any good?" he said. Darnell shrugged. "Better than you." The boy smiled, just one corner of his mouth at first, then the whole thing. "Any bet," he said. They played for 3 hours straight that first afternoon. No court, no net, just the driveway and the street, and a crooked chalk line they drew for a free throw mark. By the time the streetlights flickered on, the signal every kid in every neighborhood understood meant go home right now. Both of them were soaked through with sweat and breathing hard, and neither one wanted to stop. Michael had won, but just barely, and that barely mattered more to both of them than the winning or the losing. From that day forward, they were inseparable. They walked to school together every morning. They ate lunch at the same table. They spent every free hour at Empty Park, a flat slab of concrete 6 blocks away with 2 bent rims, no nets, and cracks running through the court like old scars. The games there were serious. The older boys played rough and talked trash like it was a second language. But Darnell and Michael held their own. Darnell was quick and clever. He could read a play before it happened and be in position before anyone else realized where the ball was going. Michael was something else entirely. He was relentless. He did not get tired in the way other people got tired. He got more focused. Together they were a problem. The older kids eventually stopped putting them on the same team. It was not fair and everyone knew it. But the thing that people always missed later, the thing that got buried when Michael became the most famous athlete alive, was that the friendship was never really about basketball. Michael ate dinner at Darnell's house at least twice a week. Celestine Tuck fed that boy like he was her own blood. She made smothered pork chops with gravy and cornbread from scratch and sweet tea so cold the glass sweated. Michael would eat 2 full plates and say thank you so many times that Celestine would wave him off and laugh and say, "Boy, hush and eat." On Sundays, Darnell went to the Jordans. Michael's mama, Dolores, was warm and sharp and funny, and she made Darnell feel welcome without making a show of it. The two families braided together the way good neighbors do, borrowing things without asking, sharing hard news gently, showing up for the small celebrations that nobody else noticed. James Jordan, Michael's father, had a soft spot for Darnell too. James was a quiet man. He did not give out words like they were cheap, but sometimes he would be sitting on the front porch watching the boys run drills in the street. And he would call Darnell over, just Darnell, and say something low and direct. "You've got good instincts, son," he said once. "Don't let anybody in this world take that from you." Darnell never forgot it. Not once. Not in the good years or the bad ones. James Jordan's words sat inside him like a stone in still water. Solid, settled, always there. The boys had a tradition they started in the fall of 1974 and kept without ever officially deciding to keep it. Every Friday evening before the light went all the way out, they met at the Empty Park court. Just the two of them. No other players, no audience, no score kept from week to week. They called it the Friday game, though they never said those words out loud to anyone else. It was theirs, just theirs. In the Friday game, they talked, really talked. The way boys talk when they know nobody is grading them and no one is watching, and nothing has to sound a certain way. Michael talked about wanting to be great, not good, great, the best who had ever played. He said it without shame, without hedging, the way a child can say a big thing before the world teaches him to make himself smaller. Darnell talked about his mama and how hard she worked and how much he wanted to hand her something better one day. He talked about the hollow feeling that lived in his chest where a father was supposed to be. He talked about certain teachers at school who looked at him like they had already decided his future, like they had read the last page of his story and were just waiting for him to catch up to the ending they had already written for him. Michael listened all the way through, every time. And then he said the same thing, in different ways over and over across those years. Don't let them write your story, D. Only you get to do that. They were just boys, 12, 13, 14 years old. They did not know yet how hard the world could push back against an idea like that. They did not know yet how different their roads would turn out to be, how far apart life could pull two people who had once shared a driveway and a flat rubber ball and the same belief in each other. But in those years, 1974 through 1978, before high school began pulling Michael toward a bigger stage, before the world started noticing what was standing on that court at MP Park, they were just two boys from Wilmington, North Carolina, and they believed in each other more than anyone else did. There is a kind of friendship that forms in childhood that never fully breaks. It goes underground sometimes. It gets buried under years and distance and silence so long it feels permanent. But it does not die. What happened 30 years later, at 3:17 in the morning on a dark street in Chicago, was proof of that. But to get there, to understand why a man with everything in the world drove himself alone to a dying streetlight and knocked 3 quiet times on a fogged-up car window, you have to understand what happened in between. How one boy became a name the whole world said, and how the other boy, the one with the good instincts, the one whose mama made cornbread from scratch, sure, the one who beat Michael Jordan almost fair and square on the very first day they met, ended up sleeping in a beat-up Honda Civic with a hole in his shoe and 2 days without a real meal. That story's not simple, and it is not all his fault, but it is his, and it is one of the most important parts of this whole thing. High school changed things. Not between the boys, not at first. The Friday games still happened. The walks to school still happened. The dinners at Celestine's table still happened. On the surface, everything looked the same, but underneath it, something had shifted, because the world had started paying attention to Michael in a way it had never paid attention to Darnell. And when the world points its light at one person in a friendship, the other person has to decide what to do with the shadow. Darnell never resented it. He wanted to be clear about that. In the years when he had the words to be clear about anything, he was proud of Michael, fully, genuinely proud. But pride and pain can live in the same chest at the same time. Anyone who tells you different has never stood just outside a spotlight while someone they love stood inside it. The moment that changed everything happened in the fall of 1977. Michael was a sophomore at Laney High School. He had worked all summer on his game. He had grown an inch. He had put in the kind of hours that most 15-year-olds could not imagine, because most 15-year-olds had not yet found the thing they would do anything for. He tried out for the varsity basketball team. His name was not on the list. Everyone knows this story now. It is probably the most famous rejection in all of sports. The coaches decided he was too small, not ready, not there yet. They chose a boy named Harvey Malone instead, 2 inches taller, a little broader, a junior with a smoother jump shot. Harvey was a good player. He was just not Michael Jordan. But the coaches did not know that yet. Nobody did, except one person. What people do not know is what happened the night Michael saw that list. He did not go home. He did not tell his parents. He did not sit in his room and stare at the ceiling. He did not call a coach to argue. He walked 3 houses down Castle Hayne Road and knocked on the Tuck family's front door at 9 o'clock at night. When Darnell opened it, Michael said nothing. He just stood there on the porch under the yellow light, and with his hands hanging at his sides and that look on his face, not crying. Michael was not a crier even then, but his jaw was tight and his eyes were somewhere far away, and Darnell understood immediately, without a single word, exactly what had happened. Celestine appeared behind Darnell in the hallway. She took one look at Michael Jordan's face and turned straight around and went to the kitchen. 10 minutes later, she came back with a grilled cheese sandwich on a plate. No question asked, no explanation required. She set it on the small table on the back porch and said, "Y'all sit," and went back inside and gave them their privacy. That was Celestine Tuck. She fed people when words were not enough. It was her first language. The two boys sat on the back porch for 2 hours. The night was warm and the crickets were loud, and somewhere down the street a dog was barking at something it could not see. Michael talked, Darnell listened. Michael talked about the shame of it, about how badly he had wanted it, how certain he had been that he was ready, how much it hurt to see his name missing from a list that felt like it was the beginning of everything. He talked about Harvey Malone with a frustration that was not really about Harvey at all. Harvey had not done anything wrong. The frustration was about the feeling that somebody had looked at him and measured him wrong, that somebody had looked at his future and seen something smaller than what was actually there. When Michael finally stopped talking, Darnell was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward and said what he said. "Mike, I know they picked the wrong one. We both know it. You know it better than anyone." He paused. "So here is what you do. You go back tomorrow. You go to practice with the JV team, and you work like they made the right decision. You work so hard and so long and so completely that when they finally look up from whatever they're doing, they feel like fools for what they put on that list." Michael stared at the floor of the porch. "You don't quit," Darnell said. "You don't get small. You get so big they can't ignore you anymore." The silence stretched out. Then Michael picked up the grilled cheese sandwich. He took a bite. He nodded slowly, chewing, looking out at the dark backyard. He did not say thank you. He did not need to. They were past the kind of friendship that needed those words for the important things. And he went home that night and he woke up before the sun the next morning. He went to the gym before school. He stayed after school. He ran. He drilled. He repeated the same moves hundreds of times until they stopped being moves and started being instinct. He did this every day, then every week, then every month. The whole world has seen what grew from that. 6 championships, 5 MVP awards, a name that became bigger than basketball itself, documentaries and commercials and a shoe empire, and a place in history that nobody is going to take. But here's the thing. The night before all of it started, before the dawns and the drills and the relentless becoming, a boy named Darnell Tuck sat on a back porch in Wilmington and told Michael Jordan to get back up. Nobody ever wrote that part down. Nobody made a documentary about it. It was just 2 boys and a grilled cheese sandwich and the right words at exactly the right moment. Darnell did not think much of it at the time. It was just what you did for your friend. You told them the truth when they needed it, and you did not make a big deal out of the telling. But Michael remembered. He always remembered. After that fall, Michael made the JV team and tore it apart from the inside. Then he made varsity. Then he grew 4 inches in one summer. People who saw him that September said he looked like a different person in the same face. And the world started changing around him fast. College recruiters, articles in the paper, people in the neighborhood who had never paid attention to the tall, loud kid from down the street suddenly acting like they had known all along. Darnell watched all of it and felt something complicated and clean at the same time. He was happy for Michael, fully bone-deep happy. He had no poison in him about it, not then. He had his own things going. He was a solid player himself, not Michael level, but good enough to contribute, good enough to hold his head up on any court in Wilmington. And there was something else, something that Mrs. Ernestine Holloway said at a parent meeting in the spring of junior year that changed the shape of Darnell's future, or should have. Mrs. Holloway taught honors math. She was a small, serious woman who wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and had zero patience for wasted potential. She called Celestine Tuck in for a meeting and sat across the table from her and said it plain. "Mrs. Tuck, while your son has one of the sharpest mathematical minds I have taught in 20 years in this classroom. I am not saying he is good at math. I am saying he thinks in numbers the way other people think in words. It is a gift, and I believe he could earn a scholarship to a 4-year college on the strength of it. Not basketball, his brain." Celestine cried on the way home. She sat in the car in the driveway for 5 minutes before she could go inside. Then she told Darnell what Mrs. Holloway had said, word for word, and Darnell sat at the kitchen table and felt a door open inside him that he had not known was there. A door with something real behind it. He worked hard. He played ball, and he studied math, and he held both things at once. He applied himself in a way that felt new, not desperate, not fearful, but purposeful. Like he had finally been given a map, and now he knew which direction to walk. For a little while, it seemed like everything was going to be okay. Then his mama got sick. The summer before senior year, Celestine started having chest pains at work. She pushed through them for 2 weeks the way a woman who cannot afford to stop always pushes through things. Then one Tuesday morning, she collapsed behind the register at the grocery store. The ambulance came. The diagnosis came 3 days later. A serious heart condition that needed surgery. The kind of surgery that needed money. Celestine Tuck had never held in her hands all at once. She had no health insurance. She had 2 jobs and tired feet and a son she was trying to raise right, and she had no insurance. The bills started arriving before she was even home from the hospital. They came in envelopes with small windows, stacking up on the kitchen table like something that wanted to be fed. Darnell got a job the week his mama came home, then a second job. He worked early mornings before school and evenings after it. He stopped sleeping enough. His grades did not collapse. He would not let them do that. But they slipped. The straight A's in math became B's. The scholarship that Mrs. Holloway had imagined became less certain. The door that had opened was still there, but it had gotten harder to reach. His mama survived. She came home. She sat in her chair by the window and watched her son leave for work in the dark and came close to tears every morning, though she never let him see it. Darnell graduated. He earned a partial scholarship to a community college in Greensboro, not the full ride Mrs. Holloway had believed was possible, but he went. He tried hard. He worked nights at a restaurant to cover what the scholarship did not, and he sat in math lectures in the daytime, with heavy eyes and a mind that could not always stay inside the classroom because part of it was always running numbers about rent and medication and what his mama needed back home. After 2 years, he came back to Wilmington. Meanwhile, Michael had gone to the University of North Carolina on a full scholarship. He played for Coach Dean Smith, one of the greatest coaches in the history of the sport, and in March of 1982, in the NCAA championship game, with the score tied and seconds on the clock, a freshman named Michael Jordan caught the ball on the left wing, set his feet, and put it in. The whole country saw it. When Darnell watched it on a small television in his apartment in Wilmington, his mama sat beside him in her chair. On the table next to her was a stack of unopened bills. When the ball went through the net, Darnell stood up. He cheered loud enough that the neighbors heard it. He was so proud his chest hurt with it. His mama looked at him afterward with soft eyes and said, "That could have been you, baby." Darnell shook his head. "Nah, mama, there's only one of him." He said it like it was nothing. It was not nothing. He sat back down. He turned the TV off when the celebration started to stretch on. He looked at the bills on the table. He was not bitter. He kept telling himself that. But something had begun in him that night. Something quiet and slow. A whisper rather than a shout. When a small voice that said, "Your window opened and you did not get through it. Your chance had a shape and you could almost see it and then it closed." He did not have a word for what that felt like. He just carried it. The way you carry something you cannot put down and cannot talk about and cannot see clearly enough to understand. He just carried it forward into everything that came next. The two friends stayed in touch through their 20s, but the calls got shorter and the visits got rarer. Michael was in the NBA now. Chicago. The bright, enormous world of it. Darnell was in Wilmington, working at a warehouse and trying to keep his head above water. He understood the distance was not personal, but understanding something and feeling it are not the same thing at all. The last real conversation happened in 1989. Michael was back in Wilmington visiting family. He called Darnell and they met at a diner on Market Street, a booth by the window, 2 cups of coffee. They talked for 2 hours and it felt like old times. Warm, easy, real, like none of the years or miles had actually changed anything underneath. At the end of the night, Michael leaned back and looked at him steady and said, "You good, D? For real?" Darnell looked back at his oldest friend, at this famous, celebrated, accomplished man who was still, somewhere behind all of it, the same kid who had stood on his porch at 9 o'clock at night needing someone to tell him the truth. And Darnell said, "Yeah, man, I'm good." He was not good. He was working a warehouse job he did not love, carrying debt he could not shake, missing a version of his life that had never quite arrived. Wes, he was holding himself together with the discipline his mama had given him and the pride that James Jordan had told him never to surrender. But he could not say that. Not to this man. Not with Michael looking at him like he genuinely needed Darnell to be okay. Like if Darnell was okay, then something in the order of the world was still holding. So he said yes. He drove home alone. And they did not speak again for almost 20 years. That is the gap. 20 years of silence sitting between two people who had once known each other better than anyone. And inside that silence, the small troubles became large ones, and the large ones piled on top of each other. And life, which does not slow down for grief or pride or the wrong words said at a diner on Market Street in 1989, kept moving forward. Until it moved Darnell all the way into a brown Honda Civic on the south side of Chicago with a hole in his shoe and a photograph on the back seat. And that is where we need to go next. Life does not fall apart all at once. That is the thing nobody tells you about a slow disaster. It does not arrive like a storm you can see coming from the window. It does not knock the door down. It slips in quiet, one small thing at a time, and each small thing looks manageable on its own. Just another hard week, just another setback, just one more thing to get through, and then things will settle down. By the time you realize it is not a setback, that it is your life, you are already deep inside it. For Darnell Tuck, the unraveling took about 15 years. 15 years of small threads pulling loose, one by one, and until the whole thing came undone. And like so many stories of quiet collapse, it started with something that looked like good news. In 1994, Darnell caught a break. He had been in Chicago for 2 years by then, working construction. Hard, physical, honest work. Pouring concrete, framing walls, laying floors. He was good at it. He showed up on time, did the job right, never left a site until the work was finished. His foreman told him once, without much emotion, "You're the most reliable man I've got." Darnell took that as high praise, because from a man like his foreman, it was. He had saved carefully. Not much. Construction pay was not generous, but steadily. And in the summer of 1994, he met a man named Curtis Webb at a job site in the South Loop. Curtis was 10 years older than Darnell, and he wore nice shoes to a construction site, which should have told Darnell something, but at the time it just seemed like confidence. Curtis was smooth and fast-talking and full of ideas, the kind of man who made every plan sound inevitable, like success was just a matter of showing up and following his lead. Curtis had a proposal, a small home renovation company, new floors, new kitchens, fresh paint, basic carpentry. Chicago was growing, neighborhoods were changing. People with money were buying old houses and wanting them made new. The business made sense. The timing made sense. Darnell put in his savings, Curtis put in his. They shook hands and then they signed papers, and then they opened for business. For 3 years, it was good, really good. Darnell turned out to be excellent with customers. He was calm and clear and honest about timelines and costs, and people trusted him immediately in the way they trust someone who looks them in the eye and does not oversell. The business grew. He hired 2 workers. He started paying down his mama's old hospital bills, still following him from Wilmington, still demanding their due. And he rented a clean 2-bedroom apartment on the north side and bought a small table and 4 chairs and a couch he actually liked. And then he met Vivian Oakes. She was a librarian at a branch library 6 blocks from his apartment. He went in one November afternoon to get out of the cold and ended up staying for 2 hours because she recommended him a book, and then he could not leave without knowing what she thought about it. She was quiet but direct, with a laugh that came slow and then all at once. I like it had been considering whether to show up. He proposed 8 months later. She said yes on a Tuesday afternoon in the same library between the shelves, with nobody watching except the books. For one brief season, Darnell Tuck had something that felt exactly like the life he was always supposed to have. a business that worked, a woman who loved him, a table with 4 chairs, his mama's bills getting smaller every month, a future with a recognizable shape. Then Curtis Webb disappeared. Not gradually, not with warning signs Darnell could have caught if he had been paying closer attention. One Thursday afternoon, Curtis walked into the bank, withdrew every dollar from the business account, and was gone by Friday morning. $43,000, 3 years of work. Every cent Darnell had saved and poured into something he believed in. The police found Curtis in Tennessee 3 weeks later. The money was gone. Curtis had been running similar schemes in 2 other cities under different names, and the machinery of the law moved slow and came back with nothing useful. Legal fees to pursue the case ate what little Darnell had left in his personal account. The business had outstanding debts to suppliers and a small equipment loan, and both of those debts had Darnell's name on the paperwork. Just Darnell's name, it turned out, because Curtis had structured it that way from the beginning. Darnell paid what he could. He sold the equipment. He closed the business. He went back to construction work the same week because a man who stops working when the ground falls out under him does not survive. And he told Vivian they would be okay. He said it plainly and he believed it when he said it, but Vivian had grown up watching her own father go through something similar. A bad partner, stolen money, the inside damage that follows a man around after he has been betrayed by someone he trusted. She knew the shape of what was coming, not the money part, the inside part, the part where a man starts going quiet and working too much and stops being present even when he is sitting right there in the room. She tried to stay. 2 years she tried. She cooked dinner and asked questions and sat with the silence when it came and tried to reach through it. But Darnell had changed. Something had hardened in him after Curtis Webb, the way a bone heals crooked if it is not set right. He worked long hours and came home emptied out. He gave short answers to long questions. He laughed less. He stopped talking about the future because every time he built something in his mind toward the future, the old fear showed up. Quiet, steady, patient, and told him it would be taken again. It was not who he was, but it was who he was becoming. Vivian moved out on a Saturday morning in October of 2001. It was not a fight. It was the kind of leaving that is worse than a fight because it is too tired even for anger. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, the table he had bought when things were good, the one with 4 chairs, and she looked at him with sad, clear eyes and said, "Darnell, I love who you were. I am scared of who you are turning into, and I cannot fix that for you. Only you can fix that." He did not argue. He did not ask her to stay. Because she was right, and that was the part that broke something extra. Not just that she was leaving, but that she was right, and he knew it, and he still could not seem to stop the thing that was driving her out the door. He sat at that table for a long time after she left. Then he got up and went to work. Around this time, Celestine moved to Atlanta to live with her sister Loretta. Her heart had been weak for years, the same heart that had almost taken her when Darnell was 17, and it had gotten weaker. Loretta had a ground floor apartment and could be home during the day and knew how to give Celestine the steady care she needed. It was the right decision. Darnell knew it was the right decision, but the distance was hard in a way he had not prepared himself for. He called every Sunday. Celestine's voice was always warm, always glad to hear him, always careful not to ask too many questions about how things were really going. She had a mother's instinct for when her child needed her to pretend everything was fine so he could pretend it too. Sometimes they talked for an hour, sometimes just 20 minutes. Every call ended the same way. Her saying, "I love you, baby, keep going." He always said he would, without Vivian, without the business, without his mama down the street, without Michael anywhere on the horizon, without any of the anchors that had once held the shape of his life in place. Darnell Tuck began to drift. He kept working. He was never a man who put work down. That was the thing about Darnell. He never stopped trying, not completely, not even in the worst of it. But the work got less steady. Piece jobs, day labor. A month of good wages followed by 3 weeks of nothing. He moved apartments once, then twice, chasing rent he could almost always make but sometimes could not. He had no savings. He was living one bad month away from the edge, and he knew it, and he kept working to stay off that edge. Then the call came from Atlanta. It was a Tuesday morning in March of 2009. Celestine Tuck had a massive heart attack in her sleep. She did not wake up. By the time Loretta found her and called the ambulance and then called Darnell, it was already over. Darnell drove the 9 hours to Atlanta alone. He did not remember most of the drive afterward. He just remembered arriving, walking into the hospital even though he did not need to be there anymore, finding her room, sitting down beside her and taking her hand, the hand that had made grilled cheese sandwiches and smothered pork chops, the hand that had cleaned other people's offices before the sun came up, the hand that had pressed into his back at his high school graduation like she was trying to put all her love directly into his spine. He held that hand and talked to her for a long time. He told her all the things he had meant to do, all the things that were still going to happen, he said, even though his voice cracked on the word still. He told her she had done everything right. He told her that the door closing when he was 4 years old had never been her fault and had never made him love her any less. He told her he was sorry he had not been there more. She could not hear him, but he said it anyway. And because some things need to be said out loud even when the person is gone. He came home from the funeral and sat in his apartment and did not move for 3 days. After that, everything moved fast and downward. He was 2 months behind on rent when he left for Atlanta. The funeral costs, modest because that was all he could manage, wiped out the small buffer he had left. His landlord, a man he had always been straight with, gave him 2 weeks and then changed the locks. A co-worker let him sleep on his couch for a month. Then that arrangement got complicated in the way living on someone's couch always gets complicated eventually. He stayed with a cousin on the west side for 6 weeks. And then one morning in the fall of 2010, he woke up in his car, the brown Honda Civic he had bought used 4 years before, and thought, this is temporary, just until I get the next job. Just a week or two. I'll be back on my feet before the month is out. He was not back on his feet before the month was out. The temporary stretched. Days became weeks. Weeks bled into months. And then one morning he realized that 18 months had passed and the car had stopped being a temporary fix and become simply where he lived. He built a routine around it the way people build routines around whatever life hands them. He knew which parking lots on the south side were safe to sleep in and which ones were not. He knew which fast food restaurants would let a man sit with a cup of coffee for an hour without being asked to leave. He found a shelter 2 miles away that let you shower in the mornings if you arrived before 7. He kept himself as clean as a man living in a car can keep himself because his mama had raised him with standards and he was not going to let those go. He kept his 2 shirts folded neat on the back seat. He kept his 1 pair of good socks balled together in the glove box for days when he had somewhere important to try to be. And he kept the photograph in its cracked plastic frame on the back seat where he could see it. 2 boys, arms around each other, big smiles, Castle Hayne Road, 1976. He never called Michael. Not once in those 18 months. Not in all the years before that, when things were getting bad. Not ever. He told himself it was pride, but it was something more layered than that. It was shame. Yes, the particular shame of a man who has always handled his own things, being unable to handle his own things. But underneath the shame was a kind of fragile logic that kept him silent. As long as he had not reached out and been turned down, the friendship was still whole, still real. The photograph on the back seat meant something as long as he had not tested it and found it hollow. The moment he called Michael Jordan and the call went to voicemail and stayed there, or worse, went to an assistant who took a message that led nowhere, that photograph would become just an old picture of 2 kids who used to know each other. He could not afford to lose that too, so he kept the silence. He survived. He got through each day the way you get through things when there is nothing else to do but get through them. He did not know what was happening on the other side of that silence. He did not know that on the other side, someone had been looking for him for a very long time. People think that being famous means knowing everything. They think that wealth and power give you access to information that ordinary people cannot get. That if you have enough money and enough people working for you, nothing stays hidden for long. And in some ways that is true. But finding one person who does not want to be found, even for someone like Michael Jordan, is not a simple thing. The truth is that a man living in a car with no lease in his name and no social media and a disconnected phone number is in some ways harder to find than a man who is trying to hide. He is not hiding exactly. He is just invisible. He has slipped through the cracks that the modern world uses to keep track of people. And once you are through those cracks, there is very little paper trail left behind. Michael had never stopped thinking about Darnell Tuck. That might surprise some people. Michael Jordan's life after basketball was not a quiet one. There was the ownership of a basketball team, the business empire, the Hall of Fame induction, the documentaries and interviews, and the constant orbit of fame that follows a man who became a legend before he turned 30. The days were full. The schedule was always crowded. But there are moments, even inside a full life, when the noise falls away. Late nights, long flights, the minutes between one thing and the next when the mind goes back to the places that shaped it. And in those moments, Michael thought about Wilmington. He thought about Castle Hayne Road. He thought about Friday games and back porches, and a woman named Celestine who fed him like he was her own. He thought about Darnell. He had a habit, private, unannounced, of checking in on people from his childhood. Not with fanfare or cameras, just a call, a card at Christmas, a quiet way of keeping the thread attached. There were 6 or 7 people from his early life that he tracked this way, people who had known him before the world decided who he was going to be. Darnell was one of them, but Darnell had gone quiet in a way the others had not. The last phone number Michael had for him stopped working sometime in 2010. He tried it after his mother, Dolores, mentioned in passing that she had heard through a neighbor from the old street that Darnell had been going through some hard times up in Chicago. Michael called the number the same evening. The recorded voice told him it had been disconnected. He asked around. He called his sister. He reached out to 2 families he remembered from Castle Hayne Road. Most of them had lost touch with Darnell years ago. One woman thought he might be on the west side of Chicago. Another thought he had moved back south at some point. Nobody knew anything for certain. Michael had a personal assistant named Greta Simmons. She had worked for him for 11 years and was one of the most organized, most discreet, and most quietly capable people he had ever employed. She could manage 6 things at once without raising her voice or losing a single detail. He trusted her completely. In the spring of 2012, he sat her down in his office in Charlotte and asked her to find Darnell Tuck. He did not make it a big production. He said it simply. Find him, let me know when you do. Do not make a show of it. Greta spent a year on it. She found old addresses, 3 across 2 different cities, Chicago and Indianapolis. She followed each one and found nothing. All dead ends. Darnell had no social media presence at all, no active employment records she could trace, no current utility bills in his name, no lease registered anywhere. A person without those things is not easy to find through normal channels. Michael told her to keep looking. In the fall of 2013, Greta brought in a man named Raymond Fisk. Raymond was a private investigator based in Chicago. He was a former police officer, someone in medium height, with a patient manner and the particular kind of quietness that comes from 20 years of watching people carefully and speaking only when it counted. He had worked on an unrelated matter for Michael's team 2 years before and had delivered exactly what he said he would deliver, nothing more and nothing less. That kind of reliability was worth more than almost any other quality in the people Michael chose to trust. Michael met with Raymond in person. He handed him a photograph, a copy of the same photo that sat in the cracked plastic frame on the back seat of a brown Honda Civic. 2 boys from Wilmington, arms around each other, big smiles. The photograph was more than 30 years old and the boys in it were men now. But Michael figured Raymond would know what to do with it. Raymond Fisk took the case. He worked it for 4 months, quietly, carefully, the way he worked everything. He found 3 men named Darnell Tuck in the greater Chicago area and investigated each one. The first was a 60-year-old retired school teacher on the North Shore. The second was a 25-year-old who had grown up in Evanston. The third one had no fixed address, but he had a car, a brown Honda Civic, registered to a Darnell Jerome Tuck. The registration listed an address on the south side of Chicago. But when Raymond drove to that address, he found a different tenant who had been living there for 7 months. The car was still registered, still active, which meant it was somewhere. Raymond put in the time to find it. 2 weeks of patient, methodical searching through the neighborhoods and parking lots. and quiet streets of the South Side, showing the photograph at corner stores and gas stations, asking careful questions in the unhurried way of a man who already knows the answer is coming and is content to wait for it. He found the car on a Thursday evening, parked under a failing street lamp on a street that the city had half forgotten. Fogged up windows, a small cleared circle on the driver's side, just big enough to see out. Raymond sat in his own car across the street for 20 minutes. He watched. He saw the shape of a man through the glass, not moving, settled in the particular still way of someone who had learned to sleep sitting up. He called Michael. Michael answered on the second ring. Raymond told him what he had found. He gave him the street, the block, the description of the car. He said, "He's alive and he appears to be unharmed. But sir, he is living in that vehicle. Has been for some time by the look of it." There was a pause on the line. Then Michael asked the only question he cared about. "Is he okay?" Raymond chose his words carefully. "He's safe. But no, sir, he is not okay." Another pause, shorter this time. "Send me the address," Michael said. "Right now." Raymond sent it. What happened next is the part that people who heard the story later said they could not quite believe. Not because it was impossible, but because it was not what anyone expected from a man in Michael Jordan's position. He did not send a car service. He did not call ahead. He did not have Greta arrange a hotel and send someone to deliver a message. He did not route it through an assistant or a publicist or a trusted friend who could handle it at a comfortable distance. He called Greta and told her only that he would be out for a few hours, and she was not to worry, and he would have his phone. She asked if he wanted his security lead to go with him. He told her no in a tone that meant the conversation was finished. She knew that tone well enough to stop pushing. He put on a plain black hoodie. He pulled the hood up. He got into a car by himself and drove to the south side of Chicago in the dark, in the cold of an October night. He parked 20 feet behind the Honda Civic, close enough to see it clearly, far enough to sit for a moment. He sat there for several minutes. He looked at that small, fogged-up car under that dying streetlight, and he let himself feel what was in him, the guilt of the years and the silence. The weight of knowing someone you loved had been invisible to the world for too long. The strange, particular grief of a man who had everything and could not protect the people he cared about from having nothing. He let himself feel all of it. Then he got out of the car. He walked across the wet street. His footsteps were quiet. He stopped at the passenger window. He could see the small circle wiped in the fog, the darkness behind it. He raised his hand. He knocked 3 times. Slow and patient. The way you knock when you are not in a hurry and you are not going anywhere until the door opens. He waited. The window rolled down, and there was Darnell, older, thinner, eyes wide and frightened for exactly 1 second before they focused and recognition moved across his face like light coming into a room. Michael Jordan looked at the man he had been searching for across 3 years and 2,000 dead ends and a silence that had stretched almost long enough to become permanent. And he said the only 2 words that made any sense at all. "Hey, D," as if no time had passed, as if they were still boys, as if Castle Hayne Road was just around the corner, and Celestine's lights were still on, and everything that mattered was still exactly where they had left it. For a full minute, neither of them said anything at all. Darnell just stared. His mouth was open slightly. Tears had already started down his face, and he did not wipe them. He did not seem to know they were there. Michael stood at the window with his hands tucked into the front pocket of his hoodie, the cold October air moving around him, and he waited. Well, he was good at waiting. People who only knew him from highlight reels did not understand that about him. That the same man who attacked a basketball game with relentless fury could also go completely still when stillness was what the moment needed. He had learned that as a boy. You wait for the right opening, you do not force it, you let it come to you. This was a waiting moment. The city was silent around them. A traffic light at the end of the block cycled through its colors for nobody. Somewhere far away, a train moved through the dark with a sound like a long, slow breath. Finally, Darnell found his voice. Mike. Just his name. Nothing attached to it. But the way he said it, cracked at the edges, careful in the middle, like a man handling something that might break. It carried 30 years inside it. Every phone call that got shorter, every visit that never happened, the diner on Market Street in 1989, The lie he had told when Michael asked if he was okay. All of it was in that one word. "Yeah," Michael said. "It's me." Darnell shook his head slowly, like he was still convincing himself. "How did you—" He stopped. He looked past Michael at the dark street, at the night, like maybe there was a camera crew somewhere, or a car full of people, or some explanation that made more sense than this one. There was nothing. Just the street in the cold, and Michael Jordan standing outside a beat-up Honda Civic like it was the most natural place in the world for him to be. "Can I sit in the car?" Michael asked. Something almost like a laugh moved through Darnell. The greatest basketball player who had ever lived, in a plain black hoodie, asking permission to sit in a car with a cracked dashboard and a fast food bag on the passenger seat. He reached across and pushed the lock up. Michael folded himself into the passenger seat. He was tall, and the car was small, and when he settled in, his knees came up too high, and the old fast food bag crinkled under his weight. He did not look down at it. He did not comment on the two folded shirts on the back seat, or the cracked plastic frame beside them, or any of the other details that told the full story of how Darnell had been living. He looked straight ahead through the windshield for a moment, just breathing, letting the moment be what it was. Then he turned and looked at Darnell. Not a quick look, not the polite glance of someone checking a box, a real, long, taking everything in look. He looked at the thin coat that was not warm enough for October. He looked at the hollows under Darnell's eyes and the sharpness in his face that comes from not eating enough over a long period of time. He looked at the hands in Darnell's lap, still trembling slightly. Darnell had been bracing himself without knowing he was doing it. He had imagined this kind of moment before. Someone from the old life appearing and seeing him like this. And in every version of that imagination, it felt like being exposed. Like standing in a bright light with nowhere to hide. He had expected the thing that people who have never lost everything do when they encounter someone who has. That particular cocktail of pity and relief that it is not them. The careful voice. To the eyes that say, "I am so sorry for you," while the rest of the face says, "I am so glad I am not you." That was not what he saw. What was in Michael's face was something quieter and older than pity. It was the expression of a man carrying something heavy. Not for Darnell, but about himself, about the years, about the silence he had let go too long. "I should have found you sooner," Michael said. "This ain't on you, Mike." Darnell said it quickly, firmly, the way he had rehearsed it in his head across the years, without knowing he was rehearsing it. "I'm not saying it is." Michael kept his voice level. "I'm saying I should have found you sooner anyway." He paused. "How long have you been in the car?" Darnell looked at the steering wheel. 18 months. Michael nodded once, slowly. Oh, he did not look away, and he did not fill the silence that followed with the kind of noise people make when they are uncomfortable. He just sat with it. Then practically, "You eat today?" "Had a sandwich, earlier." Michael pulled his phone from the front pocket of his hoodie. He dialed a number from memory. Someone picked up on the second ring, a man's voice, alert, the voice of someone who had worked odd hours long enough to stop resenting them. Michael spoke quietly and directly. He needed a room at the Four Seasons that night. He needed a meal sent up at 4 in the morning. Something real, he said, not the standard room service, something the kitchen actually made with care. He gave the name the reservation should be under. He said he did not need anyone to come meet him, just the room and the food. When he ended the call and put the phone away, Darnell was already shaking his head. "Mike, you don't have to do all—" "I know I don't have to." Michael cut him off gently but without hesitation. He turned fully in the small seat so he was facing Darnell. "Do you remember what you said to me the night I got cut from varsity?" The question hung in the cold, fogged air of the car. Darnell remembered. Of course he remembered. He had thought about that night many times across the years, especially in the bad years, especially in the car, especially on the nights when it was hardest to believe that anything he had ever done had mattered to anyone. "You told me they picked the wrong one," Michael said. "You told me to go back the next day and work like they made the right call. Honey, you told me to make them feel like fools for it." His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that was not steady at all. Something that had been waiting a long time to be said out loud. I thought about those words every single time I wanted to quit. Every early morning, every late night, every moment in my career when I was tired or hurt or losing and everything in me wanted to stop, your voice was in my head. What you said on that porch was in my head. Darnell pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling of the car. I've been looking for you for 3 years, Michael said. 3 years of dead phone numbers and wrong addresses. You know why I kept going? Darnell could not speak. Because you were my first believer. Before the scouts, before the coaches, before UNC, before any of it, you were the one who saw what I was before I had proved any of it. You never looked at me like I was Michael Jordan. Not once. You always just looked at me like I was Mike. He let that settle for a moment. I needed to find that guy. I needed to sit in front of him and tell him that what happened to him, all of it, all these years, it was not okay, and that I was not going to leave again. Something gave way inside Darnell Tuck. He had been holding himself together for 18 months in ways that most people could not imagine. The daily management of fear and hunger and shame and pride all tangled up together, the constant low-level effort of surviving with your dignity still attached. He had built walls out of routine and stubbornness and a deep refusal to completely give up. Those walls had held. Oh, they did not hold now. He pressed both hands over his face and cried the way a person cries when they have been carrying something too heavy for too long, and someone finally walks up and says, I see it. I see how heavy it is. Let me stand here with you. Not a quiet cry, not a controlled one. The real kind. The kind that has been waiting. Michael put his right hand on Darnell's left shoulder and left it there. He did not pat it or shake it or make any motion at all. Just the weight of his hand, steady and present. He did not say a word. He understood, as some people are lucky enough to understand, that there are moments when the best thing you can do for someone is simply refuse to leave. They sat in that small, cold car while the city slept around them, and the windows fogged back up completely. 40 minutes passed. Hey, maybe more. Neither of them kept track. When Darnell finally lowered his hands, his face was wet, and his eyes were swollen, and he looked more like himself than he had in years. Lighter, like something that had been bolted to him was gone. Michael reached into the back seat. He picked up the cracked plastic frame. He held it and looked at it for a moment. 2 boys on Castle Hayne Road, arms around each other, big stupid grins, the whole future still ahead of them, and not one worry in the world. I've got the same one, he said quietly. At home, on my desk. And that was the thing that reached deepest into Darnell's chest and did not let go. Not the hotel room, not the phone call, not even the 3 years of searching. This, the same photograph, kept all this time. It had never been one-sided. Not the friendship, not the caring, not the love that sat between 2 people who had known each other before the world got complicated. It had always been both of them holding it. Michael had just been holding his end in silence, the same way Darnell had been holding his. Darnell got out of the car. He took his 2 folded shirts from the back seat. He took the cracked plastic frame from Michael's hands. He stood up straight on that cold, dark street and looked at his oldest friend. Okay, he said. Just that. Michael nodded. Okay, he said back, and they walked away from the car together into the cold Chicago night. The Four Seasons Hotel at 4 in the morning is a very strange place. The lobby is all marble and soft light the color of warm honey. The carpet is thick enough that footsteps disappear into it. And the air is the same temperature everywhere, controlled and still, as if weather is something that happens to other buildings. The few people moving through at that hour, a night shift attendant folding napkins behind the bar, a lone traveler pulling a rolling suitcase across the floor, do so slowly and quietly, the way people move inside spaces that were designed for a kind of life that most people only read about. Darnell Tuck walked through that lobby with his 2 folded shirts tucked under one arm and the cracked plastic frame held in his other hand. His shoes had holes in the soles and his coat was too thin, and he had not slept in a real bed in 18 months. He walked in like he belonged there anyway, not because he felt like he belonged. His heart was going fast and his eyes kept moving the way they had learned to move in the months of the car. Scanning, checking, watching for the thing that would tell him this moment was about to be taken away. But he kept his chin up and his back straight because his mama had raised him that way. And Celestine Tuck's lessons did not go away just because she did. Michael walked beside him with his hood still up and his hands still in his pockets. And he nodded at the front desk staff the way a man nods when he comes and goes, from a place often enough that the greeting is mutual and easy. The staff were professional and warm and acted with great grace, as if nothing about the situation was unusual in any way. The night manager handed over the key card without a flicker, and a young woman behind the desk smiled at Darnell directly and said, "Welcome. Let us know if you need anything at all." He had not been welcomed anywhere in a long time. The simplicity of it went straight to the center of him. The room was on the 14th floor. When Michael pushed the door open and the lights came up automatically, Darnell stopped in the doorway. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A king-sized bed with more pillows than he had seen in one place in years. A small round table by the window with 2 chairs. A bathroom visible through a half-open door. Clean white tile. Actual towels stacked on a shelf. And through the windows, Chicago. Still dark at that hour, but alive with lights. Office towers with lit floors scattered through their heights like lanterns. The red pulse of a radio tower far to the north. The long, slow glow of Lakeshore Drive stretching south into nothing. Thousands of windows, each one a life. The whole city breathing in the dark below them. Darnell walked to the window and stood there for a long moment without speaking. Michael came and stood beside him, giving him the silence. "When I was in the car," Darnell said at last, his voice quiet and steady, "I used to look at the lights in the buildings at night. Count them. Just something to do when I couldn't sleep." He paused. "I used to wonder about the people inside, what their nights looked like, whether any of them were as scared as I was." Another pause. Whether any of them had made the same mistakes. Michael was quiet for a moment, looking out at the same lights. Then he said, "Hey, more than you'd think." It was not a thing he said to make Darnell feel better. It was a thing he said because it was true, and he knew it from a life spent being close to people who looked like they had everything and were quietly terrified underneath it. The lights in all those windows hid as many stories as they told. The food arrived at 4:15, delivered by a young man from the kitchen who set it out on the table with care. Roasted chicken, white rice, a bowl of soup that steamed gently, a small loaf of bread still warm from the oven, a plate of roasted vegetables. Simple things, made properly, the kind of food that is not trying to impress anyone and is better for it. Darnell sat down at the table. He ate slowly, deliberately, with his eyes sometimes closing for a second the way they do when something tastes the way food is supposed to taste when you have not had enough of it for a long time. He did not rush. He did not apologize for how long it took or how much he ate. Across the table, Michael drank coffee and talked. Not about anything heavy, not yet. He talked about his kids. Something funny the youngest one had said last week, a disagreement about music that had been going on for 3 days. He talked about a golf game in Scotland that had gone so badly in the rain that it crossed over from frustrating into funny about halfway through the back nine. He talked about a city in Europe whose name Darnell did not catch, but whose market he described well enough that Darnell could almost smell it. It was ordinary conversation, not gentle and warm and completely deliberate. It said, without saying it directly, "You are still a person who has normal conversations. You are not a project or a problem or a charity case. You are a man sitting across a table from a friend who has things to tell you about his week. The same as anyone." Darnell let it carry him. He felt something in his chest begin to unknot. Slowly, the way something that has been pulled tight for a long time takes a while to remember how to loosen. When the food was gone, and the coffee cups were half empty, and the city outside was moving from deep black toward the first dark gray of early morning, they talked about real things. Darnell talked. Michael listened. He started with Curtis Webb because that was where the floor had first come loose. And once he started, he did not stop. Murray, he told it straight. No softening, no excuses built in to protect himself. He had trusted the wrong man and lost everything he had built. He told it exactly like that. He talked about Vivian, How the loss of the business had changed something in him that he could see clearly now, but had not been able to see while it was happening. How he had gone quiet and cold and distant in the way a wounded animal goes still, not to rest, but to hide. How she had been right when she left, and how he had known it when she said the words and had not been able to stop it regardless. He talked about his mama, about driving 9 hours to Atlanta and arriving too late, about sitting beside her in a room she could not hear him in, talking anyway, about the 3 days after the funeral when he did not get up from his chair. He talked about the way her absence had removed the last anchor, and how without it the drifting had become falling, and the falling had become the car. He talked about the car, the parking lots, the coffee cups that bought him an hour of warmth, the folded shirts, the photograph, the routine of surviving that had eventually just become life. He did not cry this time. He was emptied out from the car. This was something different, not grief pouring out, but a reckoning being laid flat on the table so another person could see it clearly. The relief of being fully seen. Michael listened to all of it without interrupting. When Darnell finished, he leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "You know what I hear in all of that?" he said. Darnell waited. A man who got hit so many times from so many directions, Ida, that most people would have gone down and not gotten up. And you kept getting up every single time. Not gracefully, not without damage, but you got up. "I didn't have a lot of other options," Darnell said. Michael shook his head. "That's not true. There are always other options. Some of them are just the kind you don't come back from." He held Darnell's eyes. "You always chose the ones you come back from, even when it cost you. That's not nothing, D. That's everything." Outside the window, the sky had begun its slow change, the deep black giving way to gray, the gray beginning to suggest something warmer at the eastern edge. The city below was waking. Early lights, a bus moving somewhere, the very first suggestion of day. They talked until 6 in the morning. When Darnell finally stood and moved toward the bed, the real bed with the clean sheets and the 4 pillows and the blanket that was thick enough for the season, he lay down and pulled the blanket to his chin. He had started a thought. Something about what came next, what the morning would bring, whether any of this was as real as it felt right now. He did not finish the thought. He was asleep before it reached its end. He slept for 11 hours without moving. Outside, Chicago went on being Chicago, loud and cold and alive and indifferent, the way cities are. But in a room on the 14th floor, with the cracked plastic frame sitting on the windowsill, where the city light fell across it just so, when a man who had not had a safe place to close his eyes in 18 months slept like the world had finally agreed to hold still for a while. Michael Jordan left the Four Seasons at 7 in the morning. Darnell was still sleeping, the deep, motionless sleep of a man whose body had been waiting months for permission to fully rest. Michael had checked on him once before leaving, standing in the doorway for just a moment, then pulling the door quietly shut behind him. He got into his car and drove home through a Chicago morning that was cold and pale and just starting to fill with traffic. He did not turn the radio on. He drove in silence and thought about what came next, not in a vague someday way, in the specific, immediate, what are the actual steps way that his mind had always worked best. He was home before 8, and he made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, not his phone, not a laptop, a pad and a pen, the way he had always thought through things that actually mattered. And he wrote for 20 minutes without stopping. Then he started making calls. The first was to a man named Terrence Goodall. Terrence was 53 years old, broad-shouldered, and had spent the first half of his career in financial advising, and the second half trying to undo some of the damage he felt the first half had done to people who could least afford it. He ran a nonprofit on the west side of Chicago called Second Foundation, a name he had chosen carefully because he believed that the first foundation a person builds should not be the only one they get. The organization helped people who had fallen through the country's cracks rebuild practical lives. Housing, employment, legal assistance, financial literacy. It was not glamorous work. It was necessary work. And Terrence did it with the same seriousness he had once brought to quarterly earnings reports. Michael had donated to Second Foundation for 4 years. He knew Terrence personally, had sat across from him at a fundraiser dinner 2 years before and spent 2 hours talking about what actually worked and what only looked like it worked. He trusted him. He called without preamble. He explained the situation in general terms. A man in his 50s, highly capable, just emerged from an extended period of homelessness, in need of a structured pathway back. He did not use Darnell's name. Well, he asked Terrence to meet with him that afternoon. Terrence said, "I'll be there at 2." The second call was to Dr. Patricia Mwangi. Patricia was a clinical psychologist who had been referred to Michael through a mutual friend 3 years earlier, during a conversation about mental health resources for men in the Black community who resisted getting help. She had a private practice on the North Side and a reputation that Michael had looked into carefully before trusting. She worked specifically with men who had experienced what she called quiet collapses. Men who had once been capable and self-sufficient and had lost everything not through obvious failure, but through the slow, silent accumulation of things going wrong, compounded by a pride that would not allow them to ask for help until asking for help was no longer possible. Then what had made Michael respect her immediately was something she had said at a panel discussion he had attended, that there was a difference between strength and stubbornness, and that confusing the two was one of the most expensive mistakes a man could make. He had not forgotten it. He called her office. Her assistant said she was with a client. Michael left his name and a brief message. Patricia called back within 20 minutes. He explained what he needed. Not details, not yet, because that was Darnell's story to share when he was ready. He asked if she had capacity for a new patient, twice weekly to start, someone in a specific kind of situation. She said she would make room. That was all he needed to hear. The third call went to June Castillo. June was his attorney, not just for business matters, but for anything that required sharp legal thinking and complete discretion. She had represented him through complex negotiations and difficult situations over 15 years and had never once made him feel like a problem to be managed. She made him feel like a person being defended. He asked her a direct question. If a man needed to completely rebuild his financial life, clear old debts, establish clean paperwork, create a foundation to start from, what did that process actually look like, step by step, and what would it cost in time and money? June said, "Give me the details and I will tell you exactly what we are dealing with." He told her what he knew. She was quiet for a moment, making notes. Then she said, "I can have a preliminary assessment by end of week. It sounds manageable. These situations usually are, with the right help." He believed her because she did not say things she did not mean. The fourth call was the shortest. He called the Four Seasons concierge, extended the room for 90 days, gave his card details and said to charge everything to him, meals, laundry, anything the guest requested, without question and without making anything feel like charity. The concierge, a man named Philip who had worked the desk there for 11 years, said simply, "Of course, Mr. Jordan, understood." Michael hung up the phone and looked at the legal pad on the table. 4 calls, 4 pieces of a framework, not a gesture, not a check written from a distance and a clear conscience. A real structure, the kind that had a beginning and a middle and an end and asked something of everyone involved, including Darnell. That last part was important to Michael. He had thought about it on the drive home. He knew Darnell well enough, had known him for 40 years in the way that counts, across distance and silence both, to understand that the worst thing he could do was treat him like someone to be rescued. Darnell Tuck was not a man to be rescued. He was a man to be given a door that was properly unlocked and then trusted to walk through it himself. When Darnell woke up and called Michael at around 2 in the afternoon, his voice was slow and a little confused, the voice of someone who had slept deeply enough to forget for a moment where he was. "You let me sleep all day," he said. "You needed it," Michael said. "How do you feel?" A pause. "Like a person." "Good." Michael picked up the legal pad. "I'm coming back at 4. I need you to eat something first. Order whatever you want from room service. Don't look at the price." Darnell was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mike, I'm not going to be able to pay all this back." "Some of it you will," Michael said. "Some of it you won't. We'll talk about all of it at 4. Just eat first." He arrived at 4 with 2 cups of coffee and a notebook. Not the legal pad, a clean notebook, because what came next was going to need its own pages. He sat across from Darnell at the small round table by the window, and he said what he had rehearsed on the drive over. I need to ask you some things, not to fix you and not to judge you, just to understand what you actually need. Because what you need is the only thing that matters in this conversation. And Darnell, who had not been asked what he actually needed by anyone in longer than he could clearly remember, looked at his oldest friend across a hotel room table in the afternoon light of a Chicago October and told him. He talked about construction, about how his hands knew that work the way some people's hands know music, instinctively, without having to think too hard. He talked about the business he had built before Curtis Webb, about what it had felt like to build something from the ground up and watch it stand. He talked about Mrs. Holloway's words, the scholarship that had almost been, the door that had opened and then closed. He talked about numbers, about how even now, after everything, after all the years and the losses and the long emptiness of the car, he could look at a column of figures and see the shape of it instantly. The waste, the opportunity, the place where the whole thing was either leaking or holding. Michael wrote things down, not half-hearted notes. Real ones, the kind you underline and circle and draw arrows between. When Darnell finished talking, Michael looked at what he had written. Then he looked up. I want to be clear about one thing before I tell you what I'm thinking, he said. This is not charity. I don't do charity. What I do is invest in people I know are worth investing in. And you are going to be asked to work hard, harder probably than you think you can right now. If that's not something you want, tell me, and we'll figure out something different. Darnell looked at him steadily. I've been working my whole life, Mike. Hard work is not the thing I'm afraid of. I know it isn't, Michael said. I just needed you to hear yourself say it. He laid out the plan, the 3 months in the hotel, the twice-weekly sessions with Dr. Patricia Mwangi, whose name he wrote down on a card and slid across the table, the referral to Obina Asante's construction company, which he described plainly, a growing firm, demanding standards, a track record of hiring people who were rebuilding and treating them the same as everyone else on the crew. He talked about June Castillo and what she was already working on. He described the financial arrangement carefully and honestly, part of it structured as a loan with repayment terms that were real but manageable, a part of it a straightforward gift that he asked Darnell to accept without argument because it was owed, not given. And then he mentioned the other thing, not in detail, just the outline of it, a shape on the horizon. Once you are working and stable, he said, I want to talk to you about something bigger, something that fits what you just described about how you see numbers. He paused, but not yet. Get yourself right first, then we'll talk. Darnell sat with it all for a long moment. He looked at the notebook Michael had been writing in, at the card with Dr. Mwangi's name, at the man across the table who had driven himself alone to a dark street at 3 in the morning and was now sitting here at 4 in the afternoon with a plan that had clearly been building in his mind for longer than one night. Why? He said quietly. Not ungratefully, genuinely, as a real question about what moved a person to do this much for someone else. Michael set the notebook down. Because you were my first believer, he said. Before any of it, the championships, the fame, all of it, you were the one who looked at me and saw what I was going to be before there was any evidence for it. You never asked for anything back. Not once. Not in 40 years. He paused. So now I'm doing what I should have had the sense to do years ago, when I already had everything I needed to do it. Another pause shorter. And also because my mama would absolutely haunt me if I didn't. Something released in Darnell's chest. And then for the first time since he had rolled down a car window in the dark at 3 a.m. and found Michael Jordan standing in the cold, he laughed. Not a polite laugh, one a real one. Full and sudden, the kind that catches you before you can decide whether to let it. Michael laughed too, the first real, full, unguarded laugh between them. The kind of laugh that means something has been put down that was too heavy to carry, and both of you know it, and neither of you needs to say it out loud. Outside the window, Chicago was bright and cold, and going on exactly as it always had. completely indifferent to the fact that something important had just happened in a room on the 14th floor. Some of the best things happen exactly like that. 3 months is a short time and a long time, depending entirely on what you do with it. A short time because the calendar moves fast and 90 days is really just 90 days, no matter how much needs to happen inside them. When a long time because if you are doing real work, the kind that goes down into the places most people never look, 90 days can hold more change than some people manage in a decade. For Darnell Tuck, those 3 months at the Four Seasons were the hardest work of his life. That is saying something. He had poured concrete in August heat. He had worked double shifts with 2 hours of sleep. He had survived 18 months in a car on the south side of Chicago. He was not a stranger to hard, but none of that had required him to sit in a quiet room twice a week and take himself apart honestly. Dr. Patricia Mwangi's office was on the north side, on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old wood and fresh coffee. Her waiting room had 2 chairs and a small table with a plan on it that was very much alive, which Darnell noticed because it seemed deliberate, like a message about what was possible with the right attention. Patricia herself was a small woman, maybe 50, with reading glasses she wore pushed up on her forehead when she was not using them, and a way of sitting in her chair that suggested she had nowhere else to be and no interest in pretending otherwise. She did not ease into things. In their second session, after listening to Darnell describe the previous 15 years in his careful, controlled, "This is just what happened" voice, she set her pen down and looked at him directly. "You have spent 15 years holding yourself responsible for things that were not entirely your fault," she said. "And the way you have done that is by quietly deciding that you do not deserve a different outcome. That belief, not Curtis Webb, not the debt, not the car, that belief is the actual problem. Because Obinna Asante can give you a job on Monday morning, but he cannot walk you through the door feeling like you belong inside it. That part belongs to you and me." Darnell sat with that for a long moment. Then he said, all right. Just that. But he meant it all the way down. He showed up to every session. He did not cancel, did not reschedule, did not come in with his walls up and run out the clock. He talked about Curtis Webb, not just the betrayal, but his own blindness to the signs he later recognized had been there. He talked about Vivian, about the coldness that had grown in him after the money was gone, and how he had watched it push her out and had not known how to stop it. He talked about his mama, the Sunday calls, the way her voice sounded in the last years, the 9-hour drive to Atlanta that ended with him arriving too late. He talked about the car, about the particular loneliness of it, and also about the particular discipline of it, the dignity he had fought to keep every single day. He talked about the Friday games, about what it had meant to be a boy who had a best friend who said, "Only you get to write your story," about what it had meant when that voice went quiet. Something shifted across those 3 months. Not in the sudden, dramatic way that makes for a good scene in a movie. In the slower, realer way of genuine change. A weight redistributed, a posture corrected, a man beginning to stand inside his own life instead of watching it from a cautious distance. Not fixed. Darnell would not have used that word. Shori and Patricia would not have either. But moving. Clearly, steadily moving. He started at Obinna Asante's company on a Monday morning in January, the first cold week of the new year, showing up at 6:45 for a 7 o'clock start because being on time had always meant arriving early, and some things do not change. Obinna Asante was exactly as Michael had described him. Big through the shoulders, direct in the eyes, a man who ran his crews with the kind of structured precision that Darnell recognized immediately and respected without reservation. He had built his company from 3 workers to 32 over 12 years through a combination of quality work and a refusal to cut corners that his clients talked about to other clients. He did not introduce Darnell as anyone special. He introduced him as Darnell Tuck, now experienced in renovation and construction, starting today as a crew member on the Lakeview residential project. That was it. No asterisk, no explanation of how he had arrived. That alone told Darnell everything he needed to know about the kind of man Obinna was. He worked. He showed up every day and did the job completely and did not leave until the work was right. Within 3 weeks, the site foreman, a quiet, meticulous man named Desmond, who had been with Obina for 8 years, told Darnell without looking up from his clipboard that he had a good eye for the structural details that other people walked past. Darnell said thank you and went back to work. Within 6 weeks, Obina moved him to team lead on a residential kitchen renovation on the North Shore. It was a demanding project, a client who changed her mind regularly, a timeline that had been set too tight from the start, a budget with very little room. Darnell managed it. He kept the crew calm when the client called for the third time in a week. He found $1,500 of unnecessary cost in the materials order without being asked to look for it. He finished the project 4 days late but $500 under budget, which Obina told him frankly was the better of the two outcomes. By spring, 2 members of the crew had told Obina separately that they preferred to work on Darnell's jobs. One of them, a young man named Terrell, who had been with the company for 8 months, told Obina, "He's the most calm person I've ever worked under. When something goes wrong, he doesn't panic, and he just looks at it like it's a problem that has a solution and starts looking for the solution." Obina passed this along to Darnell at the end of a Friday. Darnell listened and nodded once, and Obina was fairly sure he saw something move across the man's face that looked like a person remembering who they were. June Castillo worked her way through the tangled years of debt with a precision that Darnell found genuinely beautiful. Not in the way that money is beautiful, but in the way that something working exactly as it should is beautiful. Each piece resolved in order. The old equipment loan from the business, the legal fees from the Curtis Webb case, 2 credit cards that had grown in the years of the car, a small medical bill from a clinic visit he had nearly forgotten. By April, June called him and said in her matter-of-fact way, "You are clear, completely. There is nothing left outstanding." Darnell sat on the edge of the bed in his new apartment. 1 bedroom, clean walls, a kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook in, and breathed, just breathed. The weight that had been strapped to him for 15 years was gone. He had moved into the apartment in February, 6 weeks after starting at Obina's. It was modest, and he had furnished it slowly with things he chose carefully. Not quickly, because he was done acquiring things out of desperation and wanted everything in his home to be there, because it belonged there. A real bed, a table and 2 chairs, a bookshelf he had found at a second-hand shop for $12 that he sanded down and stained himself on a Sunday afternoon, not because his hands still needed that kind of work. And on the kitchen windowsill, where the morning light came through the glass at just the right angle, he placed the cracked plastic frame. 2 boys, arms around each other, big smiles. Every morning when he stood at the counter and made his coffee, it was the first thing he saw. He and Michael talked every few weeks, short calls mostly. Check-ins, the kind that say, "I am here and I have not forgotten," rather than "we need to cover everything." Michael told him things about his life that he had probably not told many people. The loneliness that fame carries with it, the public criticism that follows a man who has been great so publicly that anything less than great feels like a personal failure to strangers who have never met him. Darnell listened carefully and said things in response that were honest and plain. And sometimes what he said made Michael go very quiet for a moment and then say, Yeah, that is exactly right. The friendship had come back, not the same as 1976. You cannot go back to 1976. Those 2 boys were inside the 2 men somewhere, but the men were who they were now, shaped by everything that had come between then and the car window and the hotel room and all of it. The friendship that came back was built on the full true weight of all of that, and it was stronger for it the way things that have been tested at their breaking point and held are always stronger than things that have never been tested at all. In April, Michael called with what he had been calling the other thing. Darnell had been on a job site when the call came in, but he stepped away from the noise and took it as standing in a patch of pale spring sunlight beside a construction fence. Michael said he had been talking to Obina, with Darnell's knowledge as agreed, and that Obina had said something that had been sitting with Michael for several weeks. Obina had said, "That man sees numbers the way other people see faces. He looks at a project budget for 10 minutes, and he can tell you exactly where the money is being lost and exactly why." Michael said he had been working for 2 years with a real estate development group in Chicago, a serious firm that was acquiring and renovating residential properties across 3 neighborhoods. They needed someone to manage the budget and logistics side of 3 major renovation projects. A real position, a real salary. A demanding work that required the specific combination of construction knowledge and financial instinct that Obinna had described. Obinna had already recommended Darnell to them directly. Michael was adding his own recommendation. Mrs. Holloway was right, Michael said. She was right about you 30 years ago, and she is still right now. It just took a long road to get here. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Darnell said carefully, "You remembered what I told you about Mrs. Holloway?" "I remember everything you ever told me," Michael said simply. "That is kind of the point of the whole thing." Darnell looked up at the pale April sky above the construction fence. He thought about a woman in a classroom in Wilmington with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, who had looked at a boy and seen something in him that the boy could barely see in himself. He thought about how long the road had been. He thought about how it had brought him here, to this patch of spring sunlight, to this phone call, to this moment. "Okay," he said, "tell me about the job." It was a Friday in June, the kind of evening that Chicago keeps hidden all winter, like a secret it is finally ready to tell. Warm without being heavy, the light coming in low and gold off the lake, stretching long shadows across the pavement. Someone 2 blocks over was cooking something on a grill, and the smell of it moved through the air with the easy confidence of a thing that belongs exactly where it is. Now, Darnell was at a court on the south side, not a special court. Nothing had been done to make it better than it was. Flat concrete that had cracked in places and been patched and cracked again. 2 rims that bent slightly to the right on both ends. Survivors of decades of use and weather and the particular violence that good basketball inflicts on iron. No nets. There were never nets on courts like this for very long, but the lines were still faintly visible. Painted over so many times, the original color had become a kind of memory beneath the newer ones. Darnell had found this court 3 weeks after starting at Obinna's company. He had been walking home from a late job and cut through a side street and heard the familiar sound. The crack of a ball on concrete, one the rattle of an iron rim, and followed it the way you follow a sound from your childhood, when your whole body knows it before your mind does. He had been coming back on Fridays ever since. Tonight he was alone, just him and the ball and the last of the June light, bouncing without thinking too hard about it, letting his hands remember a language they had not spoken in years. He was not working on anything. He was not trying to prove anything. He was just on a court, the way he had been on court since he was 12 years old, and it felt like the most natural place in the world to be. He heard the footsteps before he saw who they belonged to. Slow, unhurried footsteps crossing the concrete toward him from the far end of the court. He turned. Michael was walking toward him in a plain gray t-shirt and basketball shorts, and hands loose at his sides, eyes already fixed on the rim with the expression of a man assessing a situation before committing to it. No hood this time, no disguise. Just a tall man on a court on the south side of Chicago on a Friday evening in June. A few people on the benches at the edge of the park had already recognized him. Darnell could see it, the quick double look, the lean toward a companion, the quiet calculation of whether to approach. But something in the way Michael was moving across that court, the directness of it, the private purpose of it, seemed to communicate clearly enough that nobody came forward. Michael stopped at the edge of the 3-point line. He looked at Darnell. "You any good?" he said. It was the exact same question, the exact same 4 words from the exact same man standing on a court, and with a ball between them. 40-something years collapsed into nothing. Darnell felt something rise in his chest that was too large and too warm to name, and for 1 full second, he could not speak at all. Then he found it. "Better than you," he said. Michael's grin broke open. Not the polished smile of public appearances, not the competitive glare from 1,000 highlight films. The real one, the one that belonged to a boy from Castle Hayne Road who had always laughed a little too loud for the room and had never fully stopped. "Bet," he said. They played for 2 hours. Michael was 50 years old, and he still moved in a way that made you understand, at a level beneath thought, why a word like athlete existed in the first place. His body had not forgotten what it was built to do. When he was slower than he had been, he would admit that, would have admitted it freely, But the instincts were unchanged. The reading of a play before it happened. The positioning that looked casual until suddenly it was exactly right. The will that refused to let a moment go by without being fully incited. But Darnell was fast. He had always been fast. And something had come back into his body over the months of regular meals and sleep and work and the slow, deliberate process of becoming himself again. A lightness in his feet, a quickness in his reactions that he had assumed was gone for good. It was not gone. It had just been buried under 18 months of cold and hunger and exhaustion, waiting patiently for the conditions to change. The game was real. No courtesies, no letting up. No soft passes to make the other person feel good. That had always been the rule between them, unspoken and absolute. You played your hardest or you did not play. Anything less was an insult to both of you. Back and forth the whole long evening. The light moved from gold to amber to the soft gray of early dusk. Neither of them called time. Neither of them suggested stopping. They played until the rim became hard to see clearly, and then they played a little longer after that, and finally stopped not because they decided to, but because the dark made the decision for them. Both of them breathing hard, both of them sweating in the warm evening air. Both of them standing in the near dark of a concrete court with bent rims and no nets, and something on both their faces that was not just exhaustion. They sat down on the court. Right there on the concrete, the way boys sit when a game ends and neither one wants to be the first to leave. Side by side, elbows on knees, looking out at the city going dark around them. Someone's radio on a nearby stoop was playing something slow and familiar. A car moved past on the street with its windows down. The smell of the grill was still in the air, fainter now. "Who won?" Darnell asked. Michael wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "I had 12. You had 10. I had 11. You had 11. Michael turned and looked at him. "You always did that. You always miscounted in your favor." "I counted accurately." "You counted in your favor. You have done it since 1974, and you have not stopped." A pause, then the laughter came. Both of them at once, the same moment. The unstoppable kind that rises from somewhere below deciding to laugh. It was the laughter of men who have been through something together that was not easy and not sweet, and cost them both more than they wanted to pay, and came out the other side of it anyway. The laughter of survival, the laughter of people who are still here. It faded slowly into a comfortable quiet. The city moved around them. The radio played. "I think about what could have been different," Darnell said after a while. He said it the way you say something you have carried a long time and are finally ready to set down. Not with pain exactly, but with the honest weight of it. The business, Vivian, my mama, all of it. "Me too," Michael said. "I think about staying in touch better, finding you sooner." "I could have called," Darnell said. "At any time across those years, I chose not to." Pride, Darnell agreed. A pause. "And fear. Mostly fear, if I'm honest about it." Michael nodded slowly, looking at the dark rim above them. He understood fear dressed up as pride. He had seen it in himself enough times to recognize it clearly in someone else. "I think it came out the way it needed to," Darnell said. His voice was steady and quiet and certain, in a way that had nothing to do with pretending. Not the way it should have, but the way it needed to. So that both of us could understand something we might not have understood otherwise. Michael looked at him. "What did we need to understand?" Darnell was quiet for a moment. He looked up at the bent rim against the dark sky. Then he said, "That the real things don't go away. They just go quiet. Spring, and you have to be brave enough to keep looking for them, even when the quiet has gone on so long it starts to feel permanent." The words settled into the air between them and stayed there. Michael was silent for a long moment, long enough that the radio on the stoop had moved to a new song before he spoke. "You always did that," he said finally. "Even when we were kids. I'd be going on about something, working myself up, and you'd say one sentence, and it was just exactly it. The whole thing in one sentence." Darnell almost smiled. "And then you'd repeat it to someone else a week later, like you thought of it. I never did that. You did it at least 4 times that I know of." Michael laughed again, shorter this time. the laugh of a man caught fairly. Though maybe once or twice. They stayed on the court until the dark was complete, and the park around them had settled into its night version of itself. Quieter, cooler, the sounds of the city changing register. Two men on a concrete square with cracked pavement and bent rims and no nets. One of them had 6 championship rings and a name that people said in the same breath as the word greatest. One of them had slept in a car for a year and a half and spent 3 months rebuilding himself one session at a time, and was team leading renovation projects and getting up before dawn every day because that was who he was. In the photograph in the cracked plastic frame on the kitchen windowsill, they were boys, arms around each other, big grins, the whole future ahead and not a single worry about what was in it. On this court in June, whereas they were men, full of years and weight and everything the road had laid on them. But the grins when they came were exactly the same. And the way they sat together in the dark, easy, unguarded, two people who knew each other all the way down, that was the same too. Some things, it turns out, do not go away. They just wait for you to come back to them. There is one more thing. It is the thing that never made it into any article. The thing that Greta Simmons and Raymond Fisk and Terence Goodall and Dr. Patricia Mwangi and even June Castillo did not fully know. The thing that sat at the very center of this whole story, like a stone at the bottom of a clear river, visible if you look closely enough, but easy to miss if you were only watching the surface. It did not come out until Darnell himself decided to tell it. Years after the car, years after the hotel, years after the rebuilding and the Friday games and the job and all of it. He told it once in a quiet conversation to a small number of people who would understand what it meant. Here is what he told them. The night Michael Jordan drove himself alone to a dark street on the south side of Chicago and knocked 3 times on a fogged-up car window. He was not only going to find a friend, he was going because of something he had found in a box. Dolores Jordan, Michael's mother, passed away in 2021. She was a remarkable woman, sharp and warm and deeply private about the things that mattered most to her, the way people are when they have learned that the most precious things need to be protected from the noise of the world. After she died, Michael flew home and spent several days in her house going through her belongings. It was the kind of work that only a child can do for a parent. Slow, tender, full of small discoveries that open and close like doors into a life you thought you knew completely. In one of her boxes, a plain cardboard box, the kind used for filing, with a lid that fit tightly and a strip of tape keeping it sealed, Michael found a letter. It was written on lined yellow paper, school notebook paper. The handwriting was uneven and large and unmistakably young. The handwriting of someone in their early 20s who had not yet developed the compact efficiency that comes with years of writing things down. The letter was from Darnell Tuck. It had been written in 1985. Darnell was 23 years old. Michael was in his 2nd season with the Chicago Bulls, already electrifying arenas, already becoming the thing the world would eventually decide he was. The fame was building fast, the way fire builds when the conditions are exactly right. Darnell had not written to Michael. He had written to Michael's mother. He addressed her as Mrs. Jordan, with a formality that sat alongside a directness that was unmistakably his. He told her that he had been wanting to say something for a long time, and that writing it to her felt like the right way. That he was too shy to say it to Michael directly, and also that some things land better when they go to the person who loves the subject most. He told her that her son was going to be the greatest basketball player who had ever lived. Not because of his jumping, not because of his scoring, because of the way his mind worked on the game. The way he saw it as a set of problems that could always be solved if you thought hard enough and refused long enough. Because of the thing in him that treated every limit as temporary and every ceiling as something that existed only until he figured out how to get above it. He said he had known Michael since they were both 12 years old, that he had played beside him and against him and watched him more closely than almost anyone outside the family, and that what he saw in Michael was not just talent, it was something different from talent, something he did not have a clean word for, but knew immediately when he was near it. He asked her to pass the message along if she thought it would not embarrass Michael too much. Sure, and this is the part that stopped Michael cold on the floor of his mother's house in 2021. Darnell wrote one more paragraph. He wrote that he knew he had not been as present in Michael's life as he once was, that roads diverge, and life does not always give you the chance to explain why, but that he wanted Dolores to know, whatever happened, wherever both of them ended up, that he was grateful every single day that the Jordan family had moved to Castle Hayne Road in the summer of 1974, because her son had shown him how to believe in himself at an age when the world had not yet given him much reason to. Michael had done that without knowing he was doing it, just by being fully, relentlessly himself. And then the last line, on the one that hit Michael the hardest when he read it, sitting on the floor of his mother's house with the box open in his lap. Darnell wrote, "The best part of Michael, the part that gets back up, the part that refuses to let a limit be permanent, he did not get that from a gym. He got it from the people who loved him before the world decided to." Dolores Jordan had kept that letter for 36 years. She had never mentioned it to Michael, not once. She had filed it away in that plain cardboard box with the tight lid and the strip of tape, and she had kept it the way she kept everything that mattered. Quietly, privately, out of the noise. Michael read it 3 times on the floor of her house. The third time he read it, he had to stop halfway through and put it down and breathe for a while before he could pick it up again. Wait, because the letter showed him something he had not fully understood until that moment. He had always known that Darnell believed in him. He had felt it across the years, even through the silence, the way you can feel the heat of something through a wall. But this letter showed him the specific shape of that belief, that in 1985, before the championships, before the Hall of Fame, before the world had assembled its verdict, Darnell had already seen all of it, had already known, had been so certain that he had written it down in his best handwriting on yellow school notebook paper and mailed it to a woman in Wilmington because he needed someone to know. And the letter showed him something else. That last paragraph Darnell had written about getting back up, about refusing permanent limits, word about being loved before the world decides. Those words were almost identical to what Michael himself had said to Darnell on the night they won a street tournament at Empey Park in 1983. A summer night Darnell had remembered and Michael had half forgotten. Words Michael had said casually, the way you say the truest things, without ceremony because they are just true. Darnell had been carrying Michael's own words back to him for 38 years. They had been holding each other up across every year of the silence, neither of them knowing the other was still holding on, both of them gripping the same rope from opposite ends in the dark. That was why Michael drove to that street at 3 a.m., not only for Darnell, for the letter, for his mother who had kept it, for the boy he had been on Castle Hayne Road before the world got loud around him, for the one person who had known that boy fully and loved him without condition before any of it was proven. He did not tell Darnell about the letter on the night in the car, or the next day at the hotel, or in the weeks that followed. He waited the way he had always known how to wait, for the right moment. The right moment came on a Friday night in late summer, after one of the games, sitting on the concrete court in the cooling dark, with the city settling around them. He told it slowly and completely. All of it, the box, the paper, the handwriting, every word he could remember. Darnell sat beside him and listened without moving. When Michael finished, the quiet between them stretched long and full. A bus moved past somewhere. The last of the summer insects were going in the grass at the edge of the park. Finally, Darnell said very quietly, "She kept it all those years? She kept it all those years." Another long silence. "I didn't know if she even read it," Darnell said. "I wasn't sure if it was a strange thing to do, writing to her instead of you. I almost didn't send it." "She read it," Michael said. "More than once, I think. The paper was worn at the folds." Darnell was quiet for a long time after that. Long enough that a different kind of man might have tried to fill the silence. Michael did not fill it. He let it be what it was. A man sitting inside the knowledge that something he had done 38 years ago, something private and uncertain and mailed on a Tuesday afternoon to a woman in Wilmington, it had been held carefully all the way to the end of her life, and had then traveled across the years and through a box and into the hands of the person it was really always meant for. Darnell looked up at the bent rim above them, dark against the lighter dark of the sky. "Well," he said at last. A pause. "Good." Just that one word. Good. Not a speech, not tears. Just a single word that meant she knew. She held it. It mattered. And now it has come home to where it was always supposed to land. And somehow, in the way that the simplest words sometimes carry the most, it was exactly enough. Darnell Tuck is doing well. He manages the renovation projects for the development group. He is good at it. Genuinely, deeply good at it. In the way of a man who has finally arrived at the work he was always supposed to do and has enough years behind him to understand exactly why it matters. Obinna Asante calls him on the first Friday of every month, not about work, just to talk. Obinna is not a sentimental man, but he understands the value of keeping a good person in your orbit. Darnell understands this about him and calls it friendship anyway. Dr. Patricia Mwangi sees him twice a year now, what she calls maintenance visits. She has said more than once that he is one of the outcomes she is proudest of in her practice. She is always careful to add, not because of anything I did, because of the work he was willing to do himself. He talks to his cousin Loretta in Wilmington on Sunday mornings. He tends a small container garden on his fire escape. Tomatoes, two kinds of herbs, one stubborn pepper plant that produces exactly 4 peppers a season but refuses to be removed. He has been teaching himself Spanish from a library book for almost a year. He is better at it than he expected. He is not with Vivian. That road had traveled too far in the wrong direction, and both of them know that some distances cannot be covered in reverse. But she reached out once last spring after hearing through an old mutual friend that he was back on his feet and working and well. The conversation was 20 minutes long and warm and ended with her saying she was genuinely happy for him. He believed every word of it. He was happy for her too. He and Michael talk every few weeks, and sometimes the calls are about business. Michael has opinions about the renovation projects that Darnell finds useful about half the time and maddening the other half. Sometimes the calls are about nothing specific. Old music, the city, whatever is happening in the world that week. Sometimes Michael calls just to say he called, and Darnell understands that language because he speaks it too. When Michael is in Chicago and the timing is right, they play the Friday game. The score is always disputed. It has always been disputed. It will always be disputed. This is not a problem. This is the point. The photograph is still on the kitchen windowsill, still in the cracked plastic frame. People who visit Darnell's apartment notice it sometimes and ask about it. He tells them it is 2 boys from Wilmington. Sometimes he says more than that. Sometimes he does not need to. He has been offered a new frame more than once. He always says no. The crack is part of it now. The crack is part of the whole thing. The years and the distance and the silence and the finding and everything that lived inside all of that. You do not replace the frame. You keep it exactly as it is, and you put it where the morning light hits it right, and you let it remind you every single day of what is real and what holds, and what does not go away no matter how long the quiet gets. There is no clean lesson at the end of this story, no simple sentence that wraps it all up and tells you what to take away. Life does not work like that, and any story that pretends otherwise is not telling you the whole truth. What there is instead is this: 2 boys from Wilmington, North Carolina. A basketball rolling down a cracked sidewalk. A question, you any good? And an answer, better than you. And everything that grew from that first afternoon on a driveway in 1974. One of those boys became the most famous athlete who ever lived. One of those boys fell a very long way down and climbed all the way back up. And between them, across 50 years and all the silence and all the distance and one night at 3 a.m. on a cold, dark street, there was a friendship that refused to die. Because the real things do not die. They go quiet. They wait. And if you are brave enough and patient enough and willing to drive yourself alone into the dark on a cold October night with nothing but a plain black hoodie and a photograph and the stubborn belief that some things are worth finding no matter how long the looking takes, you will find them. You knock 3 times and you wait. And that is the story of Darnell Tuck and Michael Jordan, 2 boys from Wilmington. 1 basketball, 50 years of a friendship that refused to die. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. It does not matter if it is a big city or a small town, a living room or a phone screen on a lunch break. We want to know. People from all over the world find these stories, and every single location in the comments makes us smile. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your life, someone you have been meaning to call, someone you have let too much silence grow between you, and hit that like button right now. Every like tells us that stories like this one matter to you, and it helps us bring more of them to more people who need to hear them. And if you believe that kindness is worth spreading, that the world gets a little better every time someone drives across town at 3 a.m. for the right person, subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell too so you never miss what we put out next. This community is built on stories that remind us what human beings are actually capable of when they choose to show up for each other. And one more thing, there is a video appearing on your screen right now. Click it. We picked it for you specifically because if this story hit you the way we think it did, that one will too. We will see you there.